Marvel and DC, Peter Parker's brother becomes the strongest hero across the multiverse. Like, share and subscribe. Episode 91, Energy Core. The 6 Infinity Stones contain the 6 source powers of the single universe. Space, reality, power, soul, mind, time. Among them, the abilities of the 3 gems of mind, soul, and reality are the most peculiar. The laws that create life, imprison souls and resurrect, and change the real world. Once these 3 are put together, they are enough to make a person an invincible existence in the single universe. As for the power gem, in addition to possessing nearly unlimited power in the single universe, it also has the function of strengthening. Its existence can even greatly enhance the power of the other 5 gems. Needless to say, the space gem is very useful whether it is fighting the enemy or escaping. The last time gem, this is also the most special existence. The time stone should still be in the form of the Eye of Agamotto. Therefore, it should be in the hands of Dr. Strange Stephen. As for whether Stephen will become the new Supreme Mage at this time, Ancient One will definitely arrange it. After collecting the 2 gems of mind and space, Luya did not immediately go looking for the Eye of Agamotto. It is precisely because of the special nature of time gems. Not to mention that peeking into the future requires a certain amount of strength, but what if you can see the future? Tamper with what happens in the future at will, disrupt the timeline and create infinite parallel universes. Luya doesn't want to try this kind of consequences yet. You mean? Stark leaned his body towards the Mind Stone in Luya's hand, and Peter also came around. Such a gem is 1/6 of the universe? Good. Luya nodded. For the time being, I may still need to rely on the power of infinite gems. Another month has passed. In the end, Stark couldn't bear to destroy Jarvis. Of course, the main reason is the Mind Stone is now in Luya's hands, and it is unlikely that Jarvis will lose control. During this month, Stark began to study the body of Dr. Iron Strange. Among them, Steel Peter has always stayed by his side to help, and Peter will also come over on weekends after school. Steel Peter has accumulated a lot of knowledge in his previous life, and he himself was originally a mechanical life form, so his research went quite smoothly. In the laboratory, the table is filled with huge amounts of various parts from Dr. Strange's body. Stark discovered that after transforming into a mechanical form, no matter how seriously injured the body seemed to be, it seemed difficult to die easily. For example, Dr. Iron Strange's body parts have been almost removed, but he still has life characteristics. Until his heart is melting. It's getting hot. The temperature is rising. Soon, the surface of the heart glowed with red light. A bloody flame rose up and directly enveloped it. What's this? Stark looked at Iron Peter with some confusion. After the mechanical heart was taken out, Dr. Iron Strange finally became silent. It seems that this steel heart is its true body? But why does it spontaneously ignite now? Moreover, the burning blood flames look so weird. This. Steel Peter hesitated for a moment, then said. This is the core of our energy. The stronger the strength, the stronger the energy core. Honestly, this energy core is the strongest I have ever seen. Peter didn't show much sadness about the dismantling of Iron Dr. Strange. He has seen too many people die for various reasons. Sadness will only waste time. Peter just wants to find a way to defeat the 6-gem Ultron and save his own universe in this universe. Jarvis, analyze its composition. Sorry sir, it's not any known substance on Earth. But preliminary speculation is that it can give ordinary machines a half-life state. I understand, Mr. Stark. Steel Peter said, this is the same as Dr. Banner's conjecture. After we become mechanical beings, half is controlled by our energy core and half is controlled by our thoughts. In other words, the energy core gives the machine vitality. The soul becomes the controller of the mechanical body. This is also the reason why Dr. Iron Strange's soul has disappeared, but his body can still remain on. Is this so? Stark murmured. Perhaps, this can be used on your own Mark armor? Stark immediately thought that this energy core of Dr. Iron Strange would be the source of a major breakthrough in his research. If its energy is quite large, can it replace the reactor? If the armor wants to have high defense and strong strength, then the materials will be very bulky. But if nanomaterials are replaced, the soul will be gained, but defense will actually be sacrificed. And no matter how soulful the armor is, it can never compare to your own body. But Steel Peter stopped him at this time and said, no, Mr. Stark. The energy core has the ability to transform the body into machinery. You can't get too close to it. Steel Peter has already lost a Mr. Stark, and he doesn't want to lose another Mr. Stark in this universe. But Stark didn't stop his bright, glowing eyes. If it is said that something will really endanger the Earth and even the entire universe in the future, then he would never allow himself to become a spectator. Perhaps, this energy core is the turning point. Stark knew that even if his nano armor was successfully developed, it would be almost impossible to catch up with Luya's strength. Not to mention, Luya continues to get stronger. But with this energy core it's different. If we say that the energy core can control the metal, it can deform at any time as it wants. So, it has so many uses. For example, vibranium. It is naturally difficult for a battle armor made of ordinary alloys to withstand attacks above the planet level. What about vibranium? Stark knows that Wakanda possesses a considerable amount of vibranium. If you can use the energy core to build a vibranium armor. Moreover, the vibranium armor can also transform at any time to match its own movements. To what extent should the strength of the armor be improved? In fact, Stark has the right idea. Luya had this idea in mind when he gave him the body of Dr. Iron Strange. Does he know that there are too many powerful metals in this world? For example, URU metal. For example, the galaxy glaze given to Silver Surfer by Planet Devourer. As long as stronger metals appear, maybe the power of the armor can be infinitely improved. By then, it is not impossible for Stark to become the leader of the Deus Ex Machina. Episode 92, Wanda and Pietro, a laboratory in Kosovia. The faint smell of blood mixed with the smell of various chemicals floated in the air. Here, various instruments and medicines are placed. It looks like a place for human experimentation. This is Hydra's secret experimental base. At this time, a pair of siblings were receiving injections of medicine. Combining the new settings of movies and comics, but the setting of Wanda being born 30 seconds early remains unchanged, since their family was destroyed by a cannonball bearing the Stark Industries logo. Wanda and Pietro have joined Hydra's human experiments. The purpose is to obtain super ability and take revenge on the master of Stark Industries. If the original development is followed, after Hydra obtains the Chitauri scepter, it will use the Mind Stone on it to stimulate the abilities of the siblings. However, the Mind Stone has already been in Luya's hands at this time, and Hydra may never have a chance to get it again. In fact, after analyzing the actual combat power of Luya, Hydra has rarely appeared again so far. Today, in this laboratory, Wanda and Pietro began to receive injections of medicine for an unknown number of times. Since there was no Mind Stone, Hydra replaced it with a human enhancement potion. Originally, in the previous experiments, neither Wanda nor Pietro could obtain any changes from the human body enhancement potion. After other people were injected, their bodies either strengthened and their temperament changed drastically, or their bodies exploded or died of exhaustion. Only Wanda and Pietro had no major reactions after each injection of medicine. He has neither become stronger nor gone crazy. This special situation made Hydra researchers regard the siblings as quite special beings. Today, they have increased the dosage and increased the ratio of strengthening factors in the potion dozens of times. To be honest, with such a strong medicinal effect, even if a Tyrannosaurus Rex comes, I'm afraid it will have some reaction. As the light red liquid advanced, Pietro was the first to react this time. Boom. Boom. First of all, his heart rate increased rapidly, and soon reached over 400. If it were an ordinary person, it would not be a joke to have the heart pounding in the throat. However, Pietro just whined in pain. Younger brother? How are you? Although determined to voluntarily undergo transformation for revenge, the affection between Wanda and Pietro has not weakened. Seeing Pietro's extremely painful look at this time, Wanda was very anxious. However, she didn't have to worry about it for too long. Because the reaction that happened to Pietro soon happened to her too. Boom. Boom 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 boom. This time, Wanda's heart rate was even more intense. Like a beaten war drum, even the surrounding experimenters can hear their heartbeats. What's going on? Her heart rate has soared to 700. No, it's still rising. Still rising. It's going to be over 1,000. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. In this world, there are creatures with heart rates exceeding 1,000, but they are basically small insects. And humans have such huge bodies and complex organs. Wanda and Pietro's skin began to turn red, which was a sign of excessive congestion. On the side, the experimenters hurriedly injected tranquilizer into the bodies of the two people. They are precious experimental subjects, we must not let them die. However, something soon happened that shocked the researchers. When a researcher tried to continue injecting quicksilver with a sedative, the needle broke when it penetrated Pietro's skin. The researcher thought it was an operating error caused by his excitement, so he quickly changed one. Then, the result obtained is the same. Not caring too much, they hurriedly tested Pietro's physical data. His body is evolving. The skin, flesh, and bones are being strengthened. The internal organs are also being strengthened. Our human enhancement potion was successful? The researchers were a little disbelieving, after all, they had been trying for so long. Today, he only increased the proportion of strengthening factors in the potion, and did not make many improvements. Yes. The researcher looked at Pietro with complicated eyes, but he was special. With such a large dose, ordinary people would explode and die before receiving the tranquilizer. Soon, the researchers around Wanda also discovered something unusual about Wanda. He watched as the calming agent syringe in his hand floated in the air under the influence of an unknown force. What kind of super ability has been awakened? A red light began to emerge from Wanda's body, and an extremely destructive force was awakening. However, after reaching a critical point, her momentum could no longer rise. The heart rate is starting to drop. 500. 400. 300. 70. It really worked. As if agreed upon, Wanda and Pietro's heart rates began to drop rapidly, and return to normal almost at the same time. Test their physical fitness. The door to the laboratory opened and Baron Strucker walked in. He has been outside testing the physical condition of the siblings, and now he is sure. Wanda and Pietro's bodies have been successfully strengthened. Although this kind of success cannot be replicated for the time being, if Wanda and Pietro are strong enough, it can still play a certain role. Now the test of strength begins. The experimenter walked towards Pietro first. However, in a flash before his eyes, Pietro's figure disappeared. But soon, Pietro appeared behind Wanda again. Wanda, how do you feel? Looking at his sister who had just calmed down, Pietro wanted to step forward and help take off the experimental restraints. However, before he could help, Wanda started to feel calm and silent. The magic power of red materializes. Cha. Cha. The restraints restraining her were cut by the red magic and fell to the ground. Super speed. Unknown crimson magic. And their respective physical enhancements. Baron Strucker's face was full of excitement. I didn't know that the human body strengthening potion made from this incomplete formula could have such a strong effect. At this moment, he felt as if he had the whole world in his hands. If we continue to improve, we will promote human body strengthening medicine. What Iron Man? What Avengers? What a native? They will all be vulnerable. However, he didn't know. Wanda and Pietro are special. Their origin magic power and super speed are innate. Episode 93, Confrontation. Tony, you can't do this. Can't you think more about yourself? Pepper worriedly advised Stark. Since discovering the function of the energy core, Stark has often looked at it in a daze. This is a source of power, but it is also a curse. It allows one to immediately gain nearly planet-level power, but also transforms oneself into a semi-mechanical life form. This is where Stark hesitates. In fact, in the past few nights, he had increased the frequency of exercises with Pepper. Tony. Seeing that Stark still didn't listen, Pepper decided to use his trump card. I am pregnant. She thought this would make Stark change his mind and not use the energy core to transform himself. As everyone knows, it was her words that strengthened Stark's belief. Oh, Pepper. Surprise and confusion appeared in Stark's eyes. Apparently, he wasn't quite ready to be a father. However, at this time, he was no longer the playboy. I have already made preparations to spend the rest of my life with Pepper. But the premise is that this world and this universe can support him and Pepper to spend the rest of their lives together. So, Stark gently hugged Pepper. Thank you, Pepper. Listening to Stark's gentle voice, Pepper thought Stark had changed his mind. So, she breathed a sigh of relief. Boss, I don't think you should bring me into your two-person world. Happy sat in the driver's seat and drove the car, mumbling. It was actually Stark and Pepper who kept talking to each other in the back, which made Happy feel a little embarrassed. Don't you always say it's bad for me to drive fast? Stark said casually. Anyway, Jarvis can drive intelligently. Happy couldn't help but retort. But soon, they saw Empire State University in front of them. The purpose of their trip was to meet Luya. See where his biological experiments have come. Recently, Luya is learning about biological experiments by himself, and Peter is also helping. In fact, the purpose is very simple, which is to find a way to absorb yellow solar radiation more efficiently. This is the first time Luya has officially used his super brain, and I have to say, having a super brain is one thing, but whether you want to learn is another. Therefore, now Peter is basically studying the blood components of lures. But Luya himself moved a deck chair on the roof of the experimental building and basked in the sun leisurely. In other words, Stark is not very good at biological experiments, otherwise there would be no need for Luya to do it himself. As for Norman Osborn, his Green Goblin persona has always been a bit troublesome. What if he finds some way to restrain himself from his own blood, although the probability is very small. But Luya doesn't want Batman to restrain Superman to happen in the Marvel world. In the car, the three Starks were chatting and joking. A pair of young-looking siblings appeared in front of the car. "Oh, thanks," Happy yelled when he came back to his senses and quickly turned the steering wheel. Bang. Bang bang bang. The out-of-control car immediately rushed to the side of the road and did not stop until it almost hit a traffic light pole. Ahem. Stark patted Pepper's shoulder lightly in shock. I was relieved to see that she was fine. Happy, you should improve your driving skills. Honestly, I can drive much more steadily than you when I drive fast. Happy wiped the cold sweat on his head with some grievance. Feel sorry. He didn't make excuses, he was indeed distracted. But the appearance of the siblings was too strange. It was like teleporting, suddenly appearing at the front of the car. Tony, where are the siblings from just now? Don't hurt them. After Pepper stabilized, she urged Tony to go check on the situation. The two siblings are naturally Wanda and Pietro. Even though it was only the initial awakening of origin magic power and super speed, it gave Hydra hope. A hope against the people of the motherland. The strength of the motherland is too strong. If they don't take measures, they will always be just rats in the underground. Moreover, according to speculation, the strength of the motherland is still improving. Hydra's goal is to rule the world, but with everyone in the motherland here, how can they still succeed? Therefore, Wanda and Pietro, who had just initially awakened, were sent out in a last-ditch battle. Whether it's assassination or alienation, the order given to Wanda and Pietro is to deal with the people of the motherland. However, Wanda and Pietro were only slightly brainwashed. The two of them hate Stark more. So, after breaking away from the restrictions of Hydra, they simply forgot about the mission and went straight to Stark. At this time, Wanda and Pietro's unabashed hatred was also successfully discovered by Stark. Pepper, Happy, stay in the car and don't come out. Before getting out of the car, Stark gently clicked the button on the handrail. Click. Click click. From the trunk, various armor parts flew out and were quickly assembled on Stark to form a steel suit. Wanda and Pietro watched Stark's armor being assembled but did not start in advance. For the culprit in front of them, the siblings must defeat him from the front and dismantle Stark's proud weapon with their own hands. Click. As the visor covered Stark's face, he called out to Jarvis. Jarvis, analyze their strength. Yes, sir. Jarvis's voice sounded. Combat strength analysis completed. Alert. Alert. It is recommended to fly away immediately. Jarvis didn't even have time to give the specific strengths of Wanda and Pietro, but he was already suggesting that Stark escape quickly. Even if it has just awakened, the strength of origin magic power cannot be underestimated. What's more, there's also Pietro, who has super speed. Having super speed means that he will definitely have a matching super body, which means that his strength is also incomparable. Powerful. Today's steel suits are still made of normal alloys, but they can't withstand the magic and unarmed attacks of these two siblings. However, both Pepper and Happy were still in the car behind them. Especially, compared to Pepper being pregnant, how could Stark escape alone? Seeing the other party's murderous intent surging more and more, Stark could only helplessly raise his right palm. In the palm of your hand, the energy of the shaped cannon is gathered, ready to be fired at any time. Have we met before? Before taking action, Stark asked this question. What responded to him was Wanda's angry voice. Of course you don't know us. But you know the cannonballs of Stark Industries. If it weren't for Stark Industries, we wouldn't be homeless. But in fact, if there were no Stark Industries cannonballs, there would still be other weapons dealers. After all, compared to the world's largest arms dealer, Stark Industries is just a drop in the ocean. Episode 94. Support. The belief that has sustained Wanda and Pietro for so long. It's revenge against Stark Industries. After all, when a person loses hope in life, there is always a need for a target, even if it is hatred. At the very least, it will push people away and prevent them from becoming a walking zombie. In fact, I don't remember that I accidentally injured a civilian. Stark is a little confused. Since he became Iron Man, he has always been just, right? If this justice is justice in a broad sense. Even if damage is caused, at most some buildings will be accidentally damaged. And Stark asked himself, he will eventually be compensated for any accidental damage to other people's property. Obviously, for the cannonballs once produced by Stark Industries, Stark himself did not know accurately the damage they caused. After all, Stark was once nothing more than a playboy. After the kidnapping incident, he had already shut down Stark Industries' weapons research and development and sales department as soon as possible. Then go to hell and repent for the life you have ruined. Pietro saw that Stark was still unattractive and his anger could not be suppressed. Stomp your left foot on the ground and activate super speed. At this moment, Stark seemed to see the shadow of the lure. After all, he has only seen it on Luya so far, which can surpass the speed of human eyes. However, although Stark can't keep up with Pietro's speed with the naked eye, it doesn't mean that Jarvis can't do it. Clang! The steel suit raised his arms, and in front of him was Pietro, who was attacking with his fists. It seemed that Pietro's attack did not cause any harm to Stark. Happy and Pepper in the car breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. Because of the lure, they are quite afraid of those with super ability. No one knows how strong the other party's super ability is. In particular, Pietro's ability looks so similar to the lure. Here, the battle continues. Jarvis! Stark yelled. Yes, sir. Jarvis's voice sounded. As an artificial intelligence, it has become quite proficient in cooperating with Stark in battle. Assessing the opponent's combat strength. Speed, around 200 meters/second. Comprehensive strength assessment, far from a Superman-like body. Just tell me if I can handle it. Stark asked. Before the energy is exhausted, yes. Jarvis answered. Although Pietro awakened his natural super speed, it was only 200 meters per second. Obviously, although the human body strengthening potion has a catalytic effect similar to that of the Mind Stone, the effect is not very good. As far as Pietro is concerned, it is far from reaching a point where time stands still. Moreover, this also means that his physical strength is not particularly high. Therefore, with Jarvis's help, Stark can handle it. Only. Seeing that her brother couldn't hold Stark down for a while, Wanda slowly raised her arms. Tony, be careful ahead. Pepper reminded loudly in the car. Stark connected the signal in the car. Happy, take Pepper and leave. Regardless, Stark doesn't want Pepper to be put in danger. Oh. Tony, wait for me, I'll be right back. Happy was so anxious that he couldn't speak clearly. With a kick of the accelerator, the car quickly fell backwards. However, Wanda and Pietro had no intention of taking action against them. They are not really crazy people. Because they knew about the existence of the lost family members, they could not get involved with each other's family members. However, Stark is under great pressure. Jarvis just said that he could handle Pietro before his energy ran out. In other words, he could only struggle with Pietro. However, Wanda compares to her younger brother Pietro. Her strength is even stronger. Even the initial awakening of origin magic power is much more powerful than other normal magic. After all, even black magic can only be called primary magic before origin magic power. Wanda opened her arms and crimson magic flowed. Like a long rope, after wrapping around Stark several times, it tied him up. What is this? Some kind of magic, sir. There is no description of origin magic power in Jarvis's inventory. But this does not prevent it from making speculations. What is my chance of winning now? Stark shouted. Hey! Before Jarvis could answer again, Stark suddenly felt his eyes light up. Hello. Looking at Pietro with the mark on his eyelids, Stark forced a smile. I wonder if there is some misunderstanding between us. Glancing, Stark saw his completely broken mask on the ground beside him. Wait a minute? Why can't you let that missile wait before it explodes? Pietro demanded. At this moment, Stark finally understood why the siblings came to him. Stark Industries was once a weapons manufacturer. This is a fact that cannot be erased. If you inherit Stark Industries, you must be responsible for it. Stark was also prepared for this. However, only now did he realize that there were so many people in the world who suffered from war. Just when Stark was speechless, the surveillance on the roadside uploaded everything about them to S.H.I.E.L.D. In S.H.I.E.L.D., there are two waves of people showing different emotions at the same time. One is of course Fury, who is very fond of Stark's combat power and has not given up on absorbing him into the Avengers team. So, he immediately conveyed the order for support to Banner and Rogers. As for others, including Natasha Romanoff, he has not moved. After all, for people with super abilities like Wanda and Pietro, even if they are top agents, they will just die. And the other wave of people is Hydra. Their purpose is to gradually disintegrate the power of Fulian and Luya. Although, Wanda and Pietro siblings did not find the lure as planned. But if Iron Man can be solved, that will be a big achievement. In fact, Stark has a very simple way to get out of trouble immediately. Just call the lure's name, or ask Jarvis to get through directly. After all, Luya is quite close to here. As long as Stark calls out Luya's name, the keywords Luya has set for his super hearing will be able to recognize it. And the distance is so close, the lure can arrive even in a second. Fortunately, Banner and Rogers are nearby. Therefore, they arrived at the scene in less than 2 minutes. At this time, Pietro was holding Stark. Hulk. Help. Episode 95, Commitment. Looking at the critical situation ahead, Banner kept slapping his face. Because of the lack of communication with Hulk, Banner is not yet the Green Doctor who will be integrated with Hulk in the future. Therefore, you need to call out Hulk by irritating yourself. No. At the critical moment, Hulk lost his temper. I'll go first. Rogers said something and immediately rushed forward. Snort. Pietro snorted and threw Stark directly into the sky. The crimson magic power immediately enveloped his whole body and kept squeezing him. At this time, Stark fell into deep thought about the mistakes made by Stark Industries. Here, Pietro relied on his super speed and arrived next to Rogers in an instant. He pumped his fists, his eyes suddenly widening as he ran past Rogers. I saw Rogers' eyes locked on his body, and his head turned along with him. Call. Because of the surprise in his heart, Pietro ran directly to the side without swinging his fist. You can actually keep up with my speed? He didn't have much doubt that Stark could keep up. But someone like Rogers was surprised that he could keep up with physical strength alone. Young man, being too angry is not a good thing. Rogers said, all the muscles in his body bulged. After returning from the ice, he gradually discovered that his body had started a new round of enhancement. He told Fury this. However, no matter what instrument Fury used to test, he could not find out the reason why Rogers became stronger. Logically speaking, the super soldier serum in Rogers' body should have exhausted its potential 70 years ago. But this is ultimately a good thing. Even though Fury didn't say it, he did hold that if Rogers' strength could increase significantly, he might be able to use it to limit the lure. Yes, he was very uneasy about Luya's invincible image. Just like Batman v Superman. From a human standpoint, an absolute strong person exists. Then the life and death of mankind will completely depend on the thoughts of this strong man. Perhaps, this is one of the reasons why Ancient One has lived in seclusion for many years. On this side, after Rogers started running, he immediately lost sight of him on the street. If Jarvis is still testing now, he will find that Rogers is no slower than Pietro. Soon, the battlefield was divided into 3 parts. One is Wanda controlling origin magic power to oppress Stark. One part is the inseparable battle between Pietro and Rogers. The last piece is Banner slapping himself crazily. Come on, but even though Banner almost blushed, Hulk just didn't want to come out. Even when Banner slapped himself in the face again, Hulk completely disappeared into the depths of his personality and refused to respond no matter how much Banner called. This. Banner doesn't understand, Hulk has never been like this, except last time. He suddenly spotted a figure out of the corner of his eye. Lure. At this time, Luya was walking slowly in front of Stark. Wanda, you want to avenge your family, right? Looking at the blonde young man in front of her, Wanda did not think about how the other person knew her name, but said angrily, none of your business. I am our grudge against Stark Industries. Luya smiled, and the figure standing there shook. Before Wanda could react, she lost Stark's figure. After blinking again, Stark was already standing behind Luya, breathing heavily. At this time, Stark's entire armor became pitted under the pressure of origin magic power. Why don't you call me for backup? Cough. Stark coughed twice and did not answer. Perhaps he was also confused in his heart. Should you bear the responsibility for the mistakes made by Stark Industries? In contrast, Luya just smiled, and then continued to turn to look at Wanda. Although she didn't know how, Wanda knew that Stark got rid of his magic because of the blonde young man in front of her. So, she warned again, I say it for the last time, get out of the way. If you don't get out of the way. However, Luya said first, no need to show mercy. Aren't you going to take revenge on Stark Industries? Then you shouldn't be looking for Stark. I am now the largest shareholder of Stark Industries. This sentence is not wrong. At first, after Stark divided his shares equally with Luya, he gave a portion to Pepper. Therefore, Luya is now the largest shareholder of Stark Industries. This time, Wanda was really stumped. Luya looks very similar in age to himself, so he must not be the original murderer. Seeing this, Luya continued to ask, you must think I shouldn't be implicated? Then what do you think is the difference between Tony and me? Without Tony, there would not be fewer missiles in the world. Wanda. Luya said softly, you shouldn't anger Tony. For Wanda and Pietro. Luya's feelings about the siblings are very complicated. Tragic life experience and even tragic fate have always run through them. In the movie, as the only remaining relative, Pietro first took a bullet and died. Then Wanda's later husband, Vision, was also killed by Thanos. Finally, I had 2 children in the small world I created with origin magic power. He also resurrected Vision and his younger brother Pietro. However, the justice in her heart also told her that she should not decide other people's lives casually. So, he personally ended the family he created. Seeing that Wanda and Pietro's movements had wavered, Luya struck while the iron was hot. I won't say such words as letting go of hatred. But for the sake of your family, your lost family members, and yourselves, you shouldn't ruin a beautiful life. For Wanda and Pietro, he wanted to recruit as much as possible. Especially Wanda. Her origin magic power has considerable potential, even surpassing the Mind Stone. Just a little guidance and various powerful magics. Origin magic power can even exert multi-universe level power. Creation and annihilation, across dimensions. This kind of power cannot be underestimated. At this time, the fledgling Wanda siblings hesitated directly in the face of Luya's persuasion. Rationally, the two knew that Luya was right. But if there are no enemies, what is the purpose of their lives? I can promise you that when the real murderer is found, I will let you kill him personally. Lure made a promise. Episode 96, Reconciliation, Why Should We Trust You? Wanda questions Luya's promise. She and her brother Pietro have not paid attention to the outside world for a long time. Therefore, I don't know much about the existence of Luya. In fact, due to SHIELD's help in concealing it, not many people actually know the true identity of the motherland people until now. Regarding the two people's questions, Luya said he could understand them. Now that the internet is very developed, you can check information online. Take a look and see if Tony is the murderer in your eyes. Of course, there will be fewer records on the internet about my existence. But it doesn't matter. Looking at Wanda and Pietro, they were still wary. I can prove it to you. With that said, Luya took this opportunity to take a look at his Superman template. Superman, Man of Steel, unlocking degree, 60%. It can be said that the unlocking speed is indeed accelerating. Then, Luya exhaled slightly. An inexplicable wave appeared from his body and quickly enveloped the surrounding area. Pietro, Rogers and Banner didn't feel anything special yet. It was just as if a gust of wind had wrapped themselves around them. Stark had felt it before, when he was kidnapped and Luya took him flying. At that time, Luya called this a biological force field. A full 60% unlocking level of Superman, Man of Steel. At this time, the range of the biological force field that the lure can emit is already quite wide. At the very least, there will be no pressure if it drives the surrounding area of tens of meters. As for Wanda, who possesses origin magic power, she can more clearly perceive that she has entered an area similar to enchantment. And this enchantment is radiated by the man in front of you. You. Wanda frowned slightly. To be honest, this feeling is very strange. There is no malicious intention in this layer of enchantment. But for Wanda, she was still not used to it, so she subconsciously had to struggle. Crimson magic power emerged, and a weak force of destruction emerged from it. This is origin magic power. Luya felt the fluctuation of this magic power. Although it is still very weak, it is even completely insignificant to myself now. However, the preliminary aura of destruction inside has already made Luya feel its considerable potential. If you achieve more than diversification in the future, Wanda will definitely be a good help. Soon, Luya controlled the biological force field and started flying. Instantly, there was a wave of fluctuation in the air. Several people immediately disappeared without a trace. Some people who were taking pictures on the roadside were still surprised that several people had disappeared. One of them lowered his head and looked at his mobile phone, wanting to post the video he captured online. Oh my God, is that Iron Man Tony Stark? Then who are the people around him? Have you noticed that the man with the strong chest muscles looks a bit like Captain America? What? Captain America? Isn't that the hero of the last century? Damn it. You are not allowed to look down on my idol. By the way, what is that smart-looking idiot next to you doing? Why does he keep slapping himself? Well, by the way, that blonde man, do you think he looks a bit like a native of the motherland? However, when everyone wanted to look through their mobile phone albums, they all found that all the photos they had just taken were damaged. Shield. Director, Luya intervened. Fury wiped the sweat from his head and breathed a sigh of relief. That's good. He didn't expect that the siblings were so powerful. Even Captain Rogers would find it difficult to deal with them, especially that girl. As for Dr. Banner's inability to transform into Hulk smoothly, Fury was also helpless about this. Have you completed cleaning up the footage taken by nearby witnesses? Natasha Romanoff nodded. Don't worry, not a single photo will be spread. That's good. Fury silently dragged all the videos captured by today's surveillance from his computer into the same folder. The names of the folders are arranged in categories. The name ranked first is called People of the Motherland. On the other side, Luya took a few people and arrived at the destination Hell's Kitchen in just a few seconds. He had an idea and needed a place away from the busy city. Hell's Kitchen, it's in the perfect location. Ping An Street. In fact, ordinary residents of Hell's Kitchen no longer need the shelter of Ping An Street. Because now, no one dares to cause trouble here anymore. Those gangsters in the past have also become extinct. You don't need to continue to do the lure yourself. There are too many capable people in Hell's Kitchen today. Including Spider-Woman, she is now living a retired life in Hell's Kitchen. In the center of Ping An Street is an independent villa. Since Hell's Kitchen was consolidated, there has been more free space. Ping An Street has also become a place where the ornamental value is greater than the practical value. Therefore, this villa specially reserved for Luya was built. Next to this villa is the Pingon Hotel. At this time, Bray was sitting on a chair at the door, basking in the sun leisurely. It's hard to tell whether he is following his old university. Bray wore sunglasses and was immersed in the glory of the past. He is no longer the little gangster he was before, and it can be seen from his current figure. He used to be quite strong in order to survive in Hell's Kitchen. That is to make it more powerful and faster when running. But now, Bray's body seems to have become bloated, and his whole body has gained weight. It seemed that he had not exercised for a long time. Suddenly, he saw movement coming from the villa next door. The first time, Bray turned his head and looked. If any little brat dares to mess around in the boss's house. Bray promised to let this kid know the consequences of not going to school well. However, when the blonde hair appeared, Bray was stunned for a moment. Boss? This is the first time Luya has come since the villa was built. The last time, the villa was still under construction. Although it has only been a few months, the entire layout of Hell's Kitchen has undergone huge amounts of changes. Bray endured the excitement in his heart and wanted to step forward. However, another figure next to Luya stopped him again. Tony Stark. Bray is no longer the guy who was not afraid of anything when his head was hot. He will also understand everything about the outside world. Sometimes, Bray even feels that being the boss's younger brother might be a disgrace to the boss. Therefore, Bray stopped, sat back on the chair, and put on his sunglasses. Episode 97, Strengthening. When everyone stood still, there was no longer a noisy street around them. This is Hell's Kitchen? Stark looked around in surprise. Not bad. Luya nodded. Rogers and Banner are nothing. Shield mentioned Hell's Kitchen. They all also know that this is Luya's territory. However, they have only just seen the inside of this place. In other words, it looks like it is no longer a vicious place as described in the data. Where is this? Wanda and Pietro stood together, looking around cautiously and curiously. Is this some kind of magic? How did we get here? Not really. Luya shook his head, it's just pure speed. Pietro didn't believe Luya's explanation. How is it possible? How can someone in the world be so fast? In his mind, his speed was incredibly fast. How could someone be able to move such a long distance in such a short time? What's more, you still have people with you. This is it. Luya smiled, it's just that you haven't seen it before. The world is big, so what does speed mean? If you are strong enough, you can do anything. This is not Luya's nonsense. Take the single universe as an example. People who can control the reality gem can change the operating rules of the real world. Seeing that Pietro still looked very suspicious, Luya stopped explaining and took out the Mind Stone. He wanted to try to see if simply using the Mind Stone could stimulate the two people's abilities again. After all, in the Marvel Universe, sometimes the process does not matter. When a result exists, as long as you move towards the result will definitely happen. As for whether Wanda and Pietro will fall out after gaining power, Luya is not worried. First of all, no matter how strong the two people who have just awakened their abilities can be, they cannot be any stronger. Wanda's origin magic power is very strong, but it also requires constant practice to reach multiple levels step by step. Secondly, Wanda and Pietro were just bewitched by Hydra and were not evil people at heart. With the appearance of the Mind Stone, everyone present had different reactions. Tony didn't react at all, because he had restrained this gem before. Rogers and Banner were obviously paying attention, especially Banner. As a top scientist, Banner has been quite curious about the Mind Stone since he learned about its ability. However, it is in Luya's hands, and no one dares to ask for it from his hands. As for Wanda and Pietro, they immediately felt an inexplicable attraction from the Mind Stone. What's this? Wanda followed the yellow fluorescent gem with her eyes and asked. The Mind Stone. One of the 6 originating forces of the universe. The Mind Stone swung around in Luya's hand, and then faced the sky. The world is very big, and now you are touching a corner of it. As he said that, under the influence of Luya, the gentle light of the Mind Gem began to scatter. Soon, everyone was enveloped in this yellow light. The first to react was Pietro. He could feel that his body was being strengthened rapidly, and the power in his body was constantly growing. His thoughts moved, and after blinking again, everything around him seemed to have stopped. He turned to look at his sister Wanda, who was still staring straight ahead. He suddenly thought of that guy who couldn't pull him as soon as he appeared on the stage. Ha ha ha, Pietro rubbed his hands and turned to look at Luya. Sure enough, Luya held up the Mind Stone and remained motionless. Pietro raised his foot and reached Luya's side in an instant. He reached out to Luya's hand holding the Mind Stone, with a smile on his face. What are you giggling at? Pietro was shocked when he discovered that Luya was staring at him. He wanted to speak, but found that he could not speak while moving at high speed. In today's universe, there is no such magical power as the Speed Force. Therefore, Pietro was moving at high speed and could not speak normally. However, he soon felt the previous layer of enchantment surrounding him. Pietro found that under this enchantment, he seemed to be able to speak again. Quick responsibility, Luya praised. He meant what he said. Pietro does not have a biological force field like his own, and his ability to move at super high speeds relies solely on his body strength and brain reaction ability. Ignoring him, Luya turned his attention to Wanda. After Pietro, Wanda's body also changed. To put it simply, the amount of origin magic power stored in her body continues to grow. And, soon, it reached planet-level strength. However, when it reaches a certain level, it seems to be the limit. I don't know if it's Wanda's limit or the Mind Stone's limit. Luya could feel that if the Mind Stone continued to be output, Wanda's body would most likely undergo changes. So, he hurriedly prepared to cut off the energy radiation of the Mind Stone. However, Rogers suddenly heard a strange noise from the side. Luya looked over and found that all the muscles in his body were squirming crazily. Strangeness. Luya controlled the energy while using his clairvoyance eyes. It can be seen that Roger's heart is beating at a high speed at this time. At the same time, a large amount of golden blood was pumped out by the golden pump and flowed to the limbs and bones. Wherever the blood flows, Roger's body is constantly strengthening. Gradually a black space began to appear in Roger's body. From the black space, Luya can feel that it contains huge amounts of energy. But why is this energy so familiar? Looking at the soul gem in his hand, Luya was thoughtful. Could it be that the Mind Stone accidentally opened up Roger's body and connected its own energy to him? Like Captain Marvel? Could it be that he used the Mind Stone to create a second Captain Marvel? But no matter what, this is a good thing. Coupled with the ever-increasing super soldier serum in Roger's body, and the reaction of the two abilities, he might be able to reach the level of Heavenly Father. Just as Luya was thinking, a roar from the side brought everyone back to their senses. Hulk! Banner roared loudly and his body expanded extremely. A green giant appeared. Well. Luya blinked. What circumstances triggered the activation of the soul gem? This is, everyone needs to be strengthened once? Episode 98. Integrate, Dr. Green is born. Banner's eyes first flashed with panic, and then his eyes began to move around. He didn't understand why Hulk, who had refused to come out before, came out at this time. Moreover, he can clearly feel that the other party's willpower has been greatly enhanced. Banner's body rose several meters taller in an instant, and his thick blood vessels bulged. Wanda stared at this scene dumbfounded and murmured, "He has mutated?" Because Luya cut off the illumination of the Mind Stone to Wanda at this time, Wanda has returned to normal. After scanning the surrounding area, it seemed that only this big green guy had a problem. So, Wanda looked at Luya and asked, "How's it going? Do you need my help?" To put it simply, because of the substantial improvement in ability, Wanda is a little itchy at the moment. However, Luya did not agree. He could see that Banner and Hulk were already at a special stage at this time. Similar to, are going to integrate each other into Dr. Green. Therefore, what they need is not violence, but persuasion. However, before Luya could speak, Stark beside him spoke first. "Banner, calm down, you have to control yourself." Stark, like Luya, also attaches great importance to Banner. For nothing else, just because of the sympathy between two smart brains. However, as Stark's voice fell, Banner, whose eyes were originally confused, suddenly became angry. "Hulk." "Banner." No, he should be called Hulk at this time. Hulk roared angrily. His simple intelligence prevented him from saying anything complex yet. However, the roaring word Hulk was enough to express his inner anger. "Oh no, Tony." Luya shook his head helplessly. "He's Hulk now, not Banner." Stark turned his head in confusion. "What's the difference? Isn't Hulk the name used to describe Banner after he transformed into the Hulk?" "Of course there is a difference. Rogers took the call. Banner is Banner, and Hulk is Hulk. They are two different consciousnesses." Upon hearing this explanation, Stark felt as if he had discovered a new continent, his eyes sparkling, and he said, "So, Banner has a split personality?" Boom. There was a loud bang. Luya punched Hulk, who was rushing towards him, to the ground, and then nodded. "You can think so." However, although it was an ordinary punch for Luya, it also directly destroyed half of his villa. After Hulk climbed up from the ruins, he shook his head and was not hurt. However, Luya's punch also told him that even if he became stronger, someone could still completely suppress him. "Hulk, we are not enemies, are we?" In fact, Luya doesn't quite understand the origin of Hulk's personality. It is explained that it was originally deep in Banner's personality consciousness. It appeared because of his father's domestic violence during his childhood. But under the influence of gamma rays, he was finally awakened. However, this is not a big deal for Luya. "Hulk, I know you can understand what I'm saying. Let Dr. Banner out." Luya tried to make his words as concise as possible to prevent Hulk from not being able to understand. "No." Hulk shook his head. However, now that he had calmed down somewhat, his willpower began to weaken. This directly led to the return of Banner's consciousness. For a moment, Hulk's eyes showed two different looks. One is rational and the other is angry. Coexistence? But it doesn't seem to be integrate. At this point, Luya also completely cut off the radiation energy output of the Mind Stone. Hulk was originally the owner of gamma power. Perhaps this is why he can absorb radiation energy from the Mind Stone. "Are you Banner or Hulk now?" Rogers stepped forward. As a colleague, he didn't want anything to happen to Dr. Banner. Moreover, Banner is still such a smart scientist. I'm back." Banner seemed to have spent a lot of effort when he said this sentence. However, it seems that he has temporarily overpowered the Hulk personality. But when he lowered his head, he was surprised to find his body is actually green, and his body is larger than that of a normal person. "Banner, there is always a price to pay in exchange for power." Luya walked up to him. "I think you need to try to reconcile with Hulk." When you fully integrate with him, you may find a surprise. Anyway, judging from Hulk's ability to absorb the energy radiation of the Mind Stone, I'm afraid Hulk's potential in this world is stronger than I imagined. At the very least, I'm afraid he won't be weaker than the legendary warlord Hulk. If he can evolve infinitely, it is not impossible to reach the level of Green Shang or even the God of Destruction in the future. Okay. Seeing Luya put away the Mind Stone, Stark raised his eyebrows and said, "In other words, am I the only one who is not special?" He, who had always wanted to be strong, felt a deep helplessness at this moment. It seems that Banner and Rogers are both stronger than themselves. Not only that, the Wanda siblings they just met seem to be better than themselves. No, it should be said that they are not weaker than themselves. Now that it has been strengthened by the Mind Stone, it has become stronger. After that, will the world still need Iron Man? Stark once again fell into self-doubt. And this time, his inner torment was far greater than before. After becoming a much-anticipated superhero, Stark is unwilling to lose again. For him, it seems that he was born to be a defender of justice, not a bystander. He couldn't believe that one day the world would face a crisis. While Luya was leading a group of friends to fight, he had to pray silently in a safe place with the others. Only. At this moment, Stark thought of Pepper again. Also, my unborn child. Thinking of the energy core still in his laboratory, he hesitated. Tony. Luya walked up to him seemingly casually. At this time, half of the entire rooftop of the villa was in ruins. When the breeze blew, his blonde hair swayed slightly. Tony, many times, when you don't know how to make a choice, just follow your heart. Perhaps when you stand at a new height, you will find that many of the difficulties you currently think of will no longer be a problem. If you want to become stronger, you need to pay a price. Except for Luya, everyone present confirmed this, and Stark was no exception. Episode 99, Transformation. Mechanical Life. Stark Building. Stark sat on the sofa with his girlfriend Pepper next to him. At this time, he was making a final struggle in his heart. Maybe Luya is right, I should be more decisive. In fact, there is nothing to hesitate. If there is danger in the future, should I watch it helplessly if I have no strength? Therefore, Luya has always been supportive of Stark's use of energy cores. Glancing at Pepper, Stark said softly but firmly, "Pepper, I plan to use that energy core." Finally, he made his decision known. In fact, there is no point in hiding it. If you were transformed into a mechanical life, it would be absolutely impossible to hide it from the person next to you. Tony. Pepper looked at Stark's determined eyes and understood that he had made up his mind. I understand, but you must be careful. Stark looked very surprised that Pepper didn't object this time. You're not going to persuade me anymore? Regarding this matter that was about to change his future life, Stark actually felt very unsure. I understand your concerns, Tony. Pepper rested her head gently on Stark's shoulder, but you also have to remember that you are no longer alone. After deciding to use the power core, Stark didn't simply replace it with his reactor. He found Fury and borrowed Banner from him. Then, with the assistance of Banner and Steel Peter, after more than half a month, they finally found the best way to use the energy core. At this time, everyone, including Luya, was standing in Stark's laboratory. Tony, don't worry, if there is an accident, I will help stop it in time. The lure nodded to Stark. In the past half-month, I have become more and more proficient in the application of the Soul Gem. At a critical moment, it shouldn't be difficult to use it to cut off the connection between the energy core and Stark. After hearing Luya's assurance and looking at the concerned eyes of everyone around him, Stark nodded. Then I'll start. After speaking, Stark called for Jarvis. Jarvis, take out my reactor and replace it with the energy core. With the help of the robotic arm, an energy core with an inverted triangle was successfully removed from Stark's chest. Subsequently, Luya took out the Mind Stone and used energy radiation to lift the energy core. Following the mechanical arm controlled by Jarvis, he slowly inserted it into the hole in Stark's chest. Buzz. The moment the energy core came into contact with Stark's body, it seemed to have life and alive directly. Boom. Boom. The red flame ignited in the energy core, and it began to beat vigorously, like a real heart. Moreover, this mechanical heart is constantly being integrated into Stark's chest bit by bit. Well. The pain of having his body torn apart made Stark groan in pain. But unfortunately, his consciousness now is extremely clear. This pain becomes even more clear. Tony. Tears began to appear in Pepper's eyes. It's okay, Stark forced himself to say this. However, anyone can see the pain he is feeling at this time. Seeing that the energy core was already integrating, Luya withdrew the energy radiation from the Mind Stone. Later, it depends on Stark himself. Tony, if you find something wrong, you must say it in time. At this time, a lot of sweat was already falling on Stark's face, and he could only nod his head to express his understanding. Under Luya's perspective, he could clearly see that the burning energy core, after entering Stark's body, was approaching his beating red heart step by step. And the burning of the energy core is also destroying Stark's body. Fortunately, within a few seconds of this process, the energy core came to the side of the heart. At this time, it is also the most dangerous time for the two to integrate. If it fails, Stark will really die on the spot. In this case, I am afraid that Luya will only be able to resurrect him when he has the power of the thinking god in the future. Soon, Stark couldn't even make a muffled sound. Because, his heart is turning into ashes step by step. And when the energy core completely replaced the position of the heart, the change began. First of all, every blood vessel in the body. Because of the disappearance of the physical heart, under the influence of the energy core, his blood vessels began to transform in the direction of silver metal. Boo! Boo-hoo! The specific manifestation is that electric arcs began to appear continuously on Stark's body surface. Soon, veins began to pop out on Stark's skin. In turn, they quickly turned silver like an ebbing tide. Is this already transforming into machinery? Banner sat aside and used instruments to examine Stark's physical characteristics. At the same time, he is also the calmest person among everyone except Luya and Steel Peter. The Mind Stone seemed to give him a more powerful brain again. At this time, through the data, Banner was able to determine that Stark's life was not in danger. Of course, that's the case for the time being. Steel Peter is the calmest. Because he himself transformed from a physical body into a mechanical life. Soon, all the blood vessels in Stark's body turned into silver metal. Luya gave instructions to Jarvis. Jarvis, take out the vibranium ore. Yes, Mr. Luya. Soon, a large piece of black ore appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Vibranium ore, is it such a big piece? Rogers opened his eyes wide and looked at the ore that was almost as tall as him. His shield is composed of vibranium, so he naturally knows how valuable vibranium is. In fact, for this piece of vibranium, Luya flew to Wakanda to borrow this piece of vibranium ore. When the vibranium ore was handed to Stark, his body also began to burn. Under the skin, the flesh and blood began to melt. Everything is just right, and this is the point at which Stark and everyone have been working on it for more than half a month. Boom! Under the beating of the energy core, Stark's body felt a suction force. The vibranium ore began to decompose, and the black metal began to turn into a metallic liquid entering Stark's body. Vibranium, which is extremely hard, decomposes so easily. Soon, when the vibranium ore left only debris on the ground, Stark's transformation came to an end. At this time, there was no pain on his face anymore. Under the flesh-colored skin, there is a faint metallic luster. Opening his eyes, a circle of silver-white ripples suddenly appeared. Call. What a strange feeling. Episode 100, Hidden Danger. Stark felt his body carefully and seemed. He held out his hand. From the outside, it seemed to be a normal color. However, when his thoughts moved, the mechanical heart burning with blood in his chest began to beat crazily. At the same time, Stark's entire body began to undergo huge amounts of changes. In just a moment, the external flesh and blood had disappeared. Instead, there are layers of black and red vibranium armor. On his chest, a blood-red halo appeared. Bang! Under the strong red light, the surrounding metal began to vibrate. I seem to be able to do it. Stark stretched out his arm and pointed to where he kept his steel suit. In the blink of an eye, several suits began to melt and turned into a torrent of steel, rushing towards Stark's body one after another. Dang! 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 Countless armors formed and began to cover Stark's body. Watching this scene, Luya asked Steel Peter, who was staring intently, by the way, do all the mechanical life forms over there have this kind of ability? Manipulate metals and shape them to your own ideas at any time. Stark really has control over metal as he thought. Faced with Luya's question, Steel Peter shook his head. No. Actually, I can't do that either. Although we have been transformed into mechanical life, we do not have the ability to manipulate metal at will. Luya nodded, and then looked at the Mind Stone thoughtfully. Perhaps the Mind Stone played some role in this? maybe that's it. The difference between Stark and Steel Peter is that he was illuminated by the Mind Stone. When Stark stopped moving, a new Iron Man appeared in the laboratory. At this time, the armor all over his body had completely turned black and red, and the bloody lines in it revealed a strange beauty. The outer layer of his body is made of the original alloy material of the steel suit. And the inside is almost entirely composed of vibranium. If Stark wanted to, he could harden a certain part of his body when fighting an enemy. With the characteristics of vibranium, Stark already has planet-level strength at this time. Ordinary radiation energy, explosions and other shockwaves are no longer a threat to him. Tony, how do you feel? Luya walked up to him, reached out and knocked on his chest. Not bad. Stark shook his head. This time's evolution really felt good to him. At the very least, he can still maintain his human appearance independently, and only switch to mechanical form when fighting. This is much better than the worst result he had done at the beginning, which was to completely turn into a machine. But Luya still has one doubt. Now that you have transformed into a mechanical life, how should you replenish your energy? This is the key. As long as energy conservation is maintained, Stark's energy source must have a source. However, Stark felt the details of the mechanical heart and said with the same confusion, I feel like I'm connected to something in my energy core. That place has been providing me with a steady stream of energy. Etc. Luya narrowed his eyes slightly. He should have thought of this problem earlier. He looked at the Mind Stone in his hand and didn't feel any connection with Stark from it. So, where else can Stark be given energy? There is only one possibility, the 6-gem Ultron from another universe. Seeing Luya's face suddenly darken, Stark also realized something was wrong. Luya, what's wrong? Luya glanced at Stark with twinkling eyes and shook his head. I'll find out just by asking. Ask who? Stark asked, confused. On the side, Pepper was looking at Stark with worry. From the conversation between the two, she heard that Stark's experiment did not seem to be so successful this time, and there were still hidden dangers. Lure, Stark will be fine, right? She looked at Luya in a panic and asked. In her opinion, Luya is a person who is like a god, completely separated from the existence of ordinary people. Maybe he can solve Stark's problem. Luya nodded slightly. Don't worry, I will solve it. No matter what, I can only say this first and don't let others worry. For the 6-gem Ultron, Luya is very unsure at this time. This guy might have the potential to break through to the multi-universe level. Moreover, it must now be a top single-universe level powerhouse. And I am still a little far away from the sub-celestial father level. Thinking of this, Luya turned to look at Steel Peter, his eyes full of indifference. Tell me, do you know that your energy comes from Ultron? Luya stared closely at Steel Peter's expression. If he dared to show the slightest bit of unnaturalness, he would crush him immediately. Steel Peter is just a person from another universe. To him, he is not a family member. If he really has any thoughts in his heart that he shouldn't have. In other words, if he is simply the lackey of the 6-gem Ultron, Luya will never be merciful. However, in the face of Luya's questioning, Steel Peter only had a puzzled expression on his face. Probably, not right? If all our energy comes from it, then we should be able to feel it, right? Moreover, we have conducted a lot of research in secret in that world. Our energy core does come from an unknown place, and it cannot be it. Steel Peter also felt Lu Yan's substantial murderous intent, and hurriedly explained. Stark also understood at this time. Lua, are you guessing that my energy comes from Ultron? No way, he can still transmit energy to me even though he is a universe away. This is indeed not a trivial matter, if one's own energy is controlled by a supervillain. That means that you may be controlled by the other party at any time, and when the time comes, you will stand on the opposite side of everyone. Stark shuddered just thinking about this kind of thing. However, he still believed in Steel Peter's explanation. However, Luya's expression did not improve at all. He also believed what Steel Peter said about his ignorance. But Luya said solemnly towards Steel Peter, when you were conducting research in your own universe, did you consider the fact that the rules of your world were modified by the 6-gem Ultron? After all, after gathering the power of the 6 gems, if it can be fully used, then the 6-gem Ultron will be the real god of the universe.